Aloha, I'm Sean Lether. I'm the group leader of the Spiritual Awakenings International affiliated group, Hawaiian Islands. It is my pleasure to host the NDE, that means Near-Death Experience, Talking Dead presentation. And what does NDE Talking Dead mean? Our speaker has actually died, as in flatlined. And much to all of our benefit, she came back to share her incredible stories as well as all of her wisdom that she's gained. Today, I'm so proud to introduce Dr. Yvonne Kaysen, MD, who will be speaking about near-death experiences and post-traumatic stress. Dr. Yvonne Kaysen, MD, has had many types of spiritually transformative experiences since childhood. She's had 5 near-death experiences, 2 in childhood and 3 in her adult life. She is a retired medical doctor, previously on faculty at University of Toronto, Canada. Dr. Kaysen first coined the phrase spiritually transformative experiences in 1994, which she describes in her latest book, Touched by the Light, Exploring Spiritually Transformative Experiences. Dr. Kaysen is the president and co-founder of Spiritually Awakenings International, and I'm very proud to say a friend. So let's welcome Dr. Yvonne Kaysen, MD.
Hello, everyone. It is my great pleasure to be the featured speaker today on the NDE Talking Dead presentation. And what I'm going to be talking about is near-death experiences. NDE is the short form for that, near-death experiences and post-traumatic stress, which I think is a very, very important topic that doesn't get spoken about, and it really needs to be talked about. So this is my title is Breaking the Silence that Both Are True, Near-Death Experience Bliss and Post-Traumatic Stress. And this is my book, Touched by the Light, that Sean mentioned, my newest book. So if any of you want to hear more about some of the things I'm talking about today, then I recommend my book, which is available on paperback or online as an ebook. Now, as Sean mentioned, I have had multiple spiritually transformative experiences my whole life, which is part of how I was able to write a book about it. And I've also had 5 near-death experiences over the course of my life. And it's not that I'm particularly accident prone or something like that. How I look at it now, looking back, is that the good Lord wanted me to be really clear what my specialty was supposed to be as a medical doctor. And so I was given all sorts of near-death experiences and spiritually transformative experiences. Anyway, my first near-death experience happened at the age of 5. I'm going to focus on near-death experiences today because that's the theme of this talk, near-death experiences and post-traumatic stress. At the age of 5, I was traveling with my parents in Europe. Just very briefly, I'll tell you the stories because it's the last one that I'm going to be talking about in more detail, my traumatic brain injury that also gave me post-traumatic stress. But when I was 5 years old, I was traveling with my parents in Europe, and I was at a train station, and I saw a station hand jump off the platform onto the tracks and climb up to the tracks of the side, the next platform. And I remember thinking as a 5-year-old, oh, that looks like fun. And I went to jump off the platform onto the tracks, and then it was like time stood still. And I floated up out of my body, and it was like the motion picture of my life was on pause. But I was still thinking, and where I was up above my body, I could look and I could see more than I could see from my physical body because I had not looked both ways before I jumped on the tracks. And I saw that I was jumping right on the path of an oncoming train. So I was about to be hit by a train. And I remember thinking, which seems odd, but I remember thinking very calmly and totally unafraid, oh, I'm about to be hit by a train. And then all of a sudden, a hand came from nowhere and pulled me back onto the platform. And whoosh, the train whisked in front of me. So I ended up not being hit by the train. So anyway, that was my 5-year-old near-death experience. And I remember very clearly afterwards how I understood it as a 5-year-old. I didn't know this was paranormal. I didn't know this is not what everybody else experienced. So how I understood it was that I had flown that day. So I thought as a child that I could fly. And I remember climbing up on the fence in front of my house and spreading out my arms and jumping off because I wanted to fly down the street. And then, of course, I would tumble to the ground. And I remember being very, very puzzled. This was kindergarten. I remember this. Why couldn't I fly? Because I had such a clear memory of flying. Now I know, well, I couldn't fly because that was an out of body experience. It wasn't flying. My next near death experience happened when I was 11 years old, and I was involved in a very serious car accident with my entire family. And I sustained a head injury and I was unconscious for 3 days. And while I was unconscious, I clearly remember floating above the accident scene and watching. I could see what was happening down below the accident scene. I'm making these stories very brief because I want to spend most of the time on my 2003 near death experience. But I want to give you just a hint of what happened in the other ones. And I also remember when they took us to the emergency department in the hospital, I remember sort of floating up where the ceiling would be, looking down and watching these men that were huddled over my body. I could see my little body there on the examining room table. I could see the top of the big round circular metallic lamp like they have in surgeries and emergency rooms. I was looking at it from the top, going down. And I was watching this from above. But again, as an 11-year-old, I had just turned 11. I didn't know this was paranormal. I didn't know that this didn't happen to everybody when they were unconscious. So I never labeled it as anything other than what happened to me. And then after, when I regained consciousness 3 days later, but for almost a year afterwards, I could see ghosts. And I remember I thought as a 5-year-old that my house was haunted and I refused to sleep in my own bedroom. And I made my parents move my bed into the same bedroom as my younger siblings because I was afraid to sleep in my room at night because I kept on seeing these wispy spirits going by. And now I can look back some 50 odd years later and realize this was an after effect of my near death experience where a lot of people open up psychically and have mediumistic abilities and are able to see spirits after their near death experience. So that happened to me at the age of 11. My first adult near death experience happened in 1979 when I was a young doctor and I was in a medevac plane crash. And probably many of you have heard that story before. And I go into it in a lot of detail in my book if you want more details. But today I'll just say that I was in a medevac evacuation of a critically ill Native Indian woman in northern Canada. It was in winter. We flew into bad weather. They say that the air filters or something of both the engines froze over, so the plane ended up crashing and then ultimately sinking into a semi-frozen lake. I had to swim a really long distance to get to shore, which through the grace of God I did. I almost drowned on the way to shore. And in the process of this experience, I felt a profound sense of peace come over me. All my fear went away. I heard the inner voice, calming voice, be still and know that I am God. I am with you now and always. And with the vibration of those words, all the fear and panic I had went away. And as I was swimming to shore, the experience shifted. So in addition to that sort of mystical piece, I rose out of body and then I went into this realm filled with love and light that we've heard of from other people who've had near-death experiences. But I really had heard nothing about near-death experiences at that point in my life. This was back in the 70s, remember, where it was really not known. And I experienced the most profound, perfect, unconditional love I had ever felt in my life. And I somehow just knew in my soul, without anything being spoken, that this, what I was feeling, was the profound love of the higher power. And how I was experiencing the higher power was not anything like what I had been taught in my religion of childhood that God was supposed to be like. It was not an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne judging me. What I felt instead was that the higher power was like this infinite force field of love that was interpenetrating and underlying all of creation, that we are all a part of it, that we are all one. And when I was in this incredible love and light, I just knew that what I think of as me would live on if my body died, that like death was like a joke. And so it really didn't matter to me whether my body down there lived or died in this scenario, because I was just feeling home. I was feeling perfect love. But as the scenario unfolded, this was just a tap on the shoulder for what my future medical specialty was to be, it seems, because the divine orchestrated a rescue that had all sorts of coincidences. And I was resuscitated at the hospital, and my consciousness came back into my body. It felt like a genie being sucked into a bottle through the top of my head. I was suddenly sucked back into my body, and I was back. But I was changed. This near-death experience changed me profoundly. I mean, not only had I lost my fear of death, but it was a true spiritual awakening for me. I now came back with a spiritual hunger. I wanted to understand what had happened to me. I also had this like I can almost feel it like a craving. I wanted to read spiritual books. I wanted to read about mystics. I started reading the Bible every day, not because I was told to, but I was searching for other stories about mystical experiences like what I had. I didn't even have a word at first. I didn't know what to call it. It was only with time that the best word I could find to describe what happened to me was a mystical experience. Now I know, yes, it was a mystical experience, but because it was when I was near death, it's classified as a mystical type of near death experience. This catapulted me on my medical career in terms of researching spiritually transformative experiences of all types. And also, I had previously had a Kundalini awakening, which is not part of the story, but that had made me travel to India in 77. So it was actually Kundalini awakening, then mystical experiences, then near death experiences. And then after my NDE, I had a profound psychic awakening where I started having clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, then past life recall. So I started researching psychic phenomenon. And because all of these things are happening to me personally, I thought, these must be connected in some way. And that's how I got the idea for this umbrella term, spiritually transformative experiences. Back then, people would sometimes use the word spiritual emergence syndrome as the umbrella term. And I just personally, although I have great respect for the Groffs who coined that, I felt calling it a syndrome made it sound like it was a disease, that there was something wrong. And so I felt there needed to be a more positive way, a more positive umbrella term. And so in 1994, that's how I ended up coining that word, spiritually transformative experiences, because I felt these are all connected because guess what? They're all happening to me, and they're all happening to many of the patients who started to come see me in my practice. I then had another near death experience. I guess it was a little cosmic reminder from the universe. Don't forget what we want your specialty to be. I don't really think I needed a reminder, but I guess God knows better than I do. In 1995, I was involved in a near miss plane incident, which just because of time, I'm not going to go into great detail today. But in this near miss plane incident, when I thought I was going to die, I immediately went out of body and I started going up through that dark expanse of space. So this was the first time I actually saw that thing that people call the tunnel, although to me it was like a dark expanse of space, and I was rising up towards the light, but it was that deep sort of royal blue that you see in the photo. And then I was stopped by a being of light part way up towards the light. And it was also that incredible royal blue color. And that being of light telepathically communicated to me, it is not your time. And pop, just like that, I was back in my body again in the plane. But I was in an extraordinary state of consciousness. It felt like I came back without a skin, that there was nothing separating me from everything around me. And, I had to go through like, customs and security and pick up my luggage and go home in this extraordinary state of consciousness. Anyway, I managed to do that somehow. And then when I went home, I had a very deep sleep. And the next morning, when I woke up, I was in a unitive state of consciousness. What happened is that it felt like the top of my head had been removed. And where the top of my head used to be, it was like I was a stalk on the mushroom. My body was a little stem, and there's this vast ocean of consciousness that I was connected through the top of my head. And I was home. I didn't talk about this experience for years because I had no need to. It was really like they say in some of these yogic and Buddhist traditions, they have a saying, before enlightenment, chopping wood and hauling water. After enlightenment, chopping wood and hauling water. And that's exactly what it was like. I did everything normal, went to work, looked after my son, drove the car, did my errands. But 24/7, I was in this incredible state of communion. Now, you might think that sounds a little grandiose, but it's not a grandiose experience, because when I was in that state of communion, it was incredibly humbling. It was humbling in many ways. One way is that I absolutely knew how small I was in comparison to the ocean of consciousness. It's like being a drop of the Pacific Ocean and being aware that you are just a drop of the Pacific Ocean. So at the same time as feeling connected, I was just absolutely aware of how vast that ocean of consciousness that connects us all really is. And then the other thing that I was aware of all the time while I was in that unitive state of consciousness was that we are all equally connected. And the best that I could explain it is like a million legs on a millipede, and that we're all legs on this millipede. And that millipede is the ocean of God's consciousness. And each one of us is a little leg, and we're all equally connected. The only difference that had happened is that veil in my consciousness that had made me unable to see that I was connected had been removed. And so the difference between you and me was only that I could see the connection. I could feel the connection. I was living that connection. Everyone was just as connected as I was. Everyone was just as loved as I was. But for whatever reason, through divine grace, I was now aware and living 24/7, knowing, feeling, experiencing that connection. And my intuition was incredible while I was in that state. If I needed to know something, the information would just come to me. I didn't have to look stuff up, it would just be there. I remember being in my office, seeing patients, I was counseling STE experiencers in my practice. And people would just walk in my doorway. And as soon as I was aware of their energy field, I would just know. I would know what the issues were that they were grappling with right now. And I would also know how to help them even before they said a word. Anyway, this state of unitive consciousness lasted for about 2 months. Now, it also did something else for me. because, I had read a lot of books about the spiritual path and I'd studied a lot of spiritual traditions. And so many teachings made it seem so far, so impossible that unit of consciousness or God communion or Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it, they made it seem so far that it wasn't possible for a human being, like a normal person like me, to actually experience it on an ongoing basis. Glimpses, maybe glimpses and mystical experiences, but ongoing communion. And this showed me it's possible. And I hope all of you will remember this message from this talk today, too. It is possible for ordinary human beings like us. You never know when divine grace is going to touch our life, and we might experience that ongoing communion. It's not just something the saints and mystics of the past have had. It is possible for us today. Well, I look at it like I guess my karma caught up with me. After about 2 months, I was no longer able to sustain that. I started having to meditate with my consciousness focused here to pop into that state of communion again. And then it became more difficult and more difficult for me to pop into that state of communion until finally I lost that ability. And then I was striving to re-achieve that state of communion ever since. Now, this connects with my 2003 traumatic brain injury near-death experience, which I'm going to be talking about for the rest of this presentation. Now, it happened at Niagara Falls, Canada. And this is a picture taken a few years later. My son and I, if you want to know what my son looks like, that's what my son looks like. My son and I, we go to Niagara Falls regularly. I love going to Niagara Falls. And at the bottom of the falls on the Canadian side, which is actually where this photo is, is a platform on the Canadian side. And I used to love to go there. I'd go there usually several times a year in order to meditate. I'd stand there at the railing and I'd be looking out at the falls, and the roar of the waterfalls is like the Om vibration. To me, it's like the Om vibration. And it would help me go into a very deep meditative state very quickly. And so I just, nobody behind me would know what I'd be doing. I'd be holding the railing, facing the falls, and go into a meditative state and just love it there. So, but this day, it was November the 8th, 2003. I had gone to Niagara Falls with a friend, and I was meditating at the base of the falls, holding the railing, looking at the falls the way that I love to do. And I went into a deep, deep state, and I re-entered that state of communion. I was home again. The veil was gone between me and the other side. And you can see there at the edge of the falls, it's sort of dark where there's some rock there, and there's actually some caves there. And what I could see with my eye when I entered that state of communion, I could see like a cave there, an etheric cave there that was just bursting, radiating light. And in that radiating light, I saw a being of light. And it was one of the saints from my particular spiritual tradition. It was Mahavatar Babaji in his light body. And he telepathically communicated to me, "Welcome home." I stayed in that state of communion for 2 hours. I was there with a friend. We went and ate dinner overlooking the waterfalls. And I remember saying to my friend, I don't know how long this is going to last, because the last time it lasted 2 months, then it went away. But I said, now that I found my way home again, I'm going to cry. I know it's possible. I know it's possible for me to find my way home again. And I was just feeling so profoundly happy, so profoundly happy. I died 2 hours after this experience began. I now think that state of communion for the 2 hours before I died was my end of life experience. And that was why I asked that question of Dr. Fennick, if he had seen this before, because it's what people describe. Seeing saints, beings of light on the other side, the veil is gone. I was in a non dual state, and I was in that state when I died. And what happened was I slipped on black ice and I fell back and I hit my head on rock pavement and nothing broke my fall. So it was just, I fell straight back, my full body weight, my full body horse weight, and smack my head into rock. Immediately, I was catapulted out of my body. Immediately, I found my spirit launched out of my body. And it was like I was being whisked by this force that was far greater than myself up towards the light, like, at the speed of light. And it was through a dark, expansive space. Some would call it a tunnel. To me, it was like a dark, expansive space. And then suddenly, there I was in the light. But this time, it was different because this time I was welcomed into the light. This was the same loving light that I'd been in my 1979 near-death experience. But this time I was being welcomed by two beings of light. And these were two beings of light that I immediately recognized, two saints from my tradition. The one who had said, "Welcome home," which was Mahavatar Babaji, and Paramahansa Yogananda in their life bodies. And, I didn't have to look for them. They were waiting for me. They were welcoming me. It was like they were ushering me to the other side, which is so an incredible feeling of safety, because sometimes you wonder the human part of you. What if I forget to pray when I'm dying? Or do I have to look to find the light? Or it just all seemed to happen automatically. And the two great saints that I call my gurus, they were actually escorting me into the light. And they immediately telepathically communicated to me without words, informing me in the most loving and beautiful, welcoming way that I had died, that my work in the incarnation of Dr. Yvonne Cason had been completed. And I felt incredible joy. Incredible joy. It was an incredible love and actually a feeling of celebration. It actually felt like there was like a graduation party or something being held in heaven with all these souls that I guess I knew them or they knew me, celebrating that I had successfully completed my incarnation. And I remember, I guess, part of my ego self was still there because I remember then I hesitated for a minute at the doorway because I'd heard, that you have the life review and I was thinking, uh-oh, here it comes. Who's perfect? I've of course made mistakes in my life, just as everyone makes mistakes in their life. And it was so clear that they telepathically read my thoughts. Because as soon as I had that thought, the two saints sort of glanced in my direction. And then with their glance, it's impossible to describe. It was with their glance that they dispelled that fear and also gave me the understanding that don't worry about it. Don't worry. that I understood that just like when a loving parent is watching their child learn how to walk, that we understand with love that they're going to stumble, they're going to fall, they're going to skin their knees, they're going to bump their head, they're going to make mistakes, that was how the divine mother, father, God understood whatever, things my ego was worried about. And so I could just let go of all of it. And I just basked in this complete feeling of love and joy and acceptance and completion, that my work in the body of Dr. Yvonne Cason was over. And then I went into sort of a different I'll call it state of consciousness. It's really, really difficult to describe because at first I was having a lot of visual imagery, like I was seeing the light and I was seeing the saints in their light bodies. And I went more into a state of pure consciousness. That's the best that I can describe it, where it was still and it was peaceful and it was expansive. And it was not a state of any sort of grasping that anything that was required was just revealed. And suddenly I remembered all of my past lives while in this state of consciousness. And it was like I'd always known them. And for some reason I'd forgotten and now could remember them again. It was like, oh yes, of course. Now I remember. And that as I remembered all of my past lives, and it came all at once. It was like think of downloads we get, but think of it as a massive, 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 massive download, that just, oh, yeah, of course. And suddenly my incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Cason made sense to me. So I had like an aha experience, like, aha, no wonder I had such a unusual life having all these near-death experiences, Kundalini awakening, mystical experiences, out-of-body experiences, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, past life recall. Guess what? This is not the first life I've been like this. I've been a mystic in many, many incarnations. I've had near-death experiences in many incarnations. So it seemed like my soul was just sort of continuing on in its journey. And I could also see, and it's very hard to describe this, but I'm going to use a metaphor to try and describe it. It's like, because I had many past life memories when I was incarnated as Yvonne Cason before the head injury, but they were all like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. So I had this piece of a puzzle, this piece of a puzzle, this piece of a puzzle, this piece of puzzle. But what happened when I remembered all my past lives on the other side was like, all the pieces were put together. The whole jigsaw puzzle was complete. And I could see how it all fit together perfectly. So it was a massive sort of eureka. I understand God's plan is perfect experience. And I also, while I was in this plane of pure consciousness, experienced what I call timeless time because I don't have a better way to explain it. And what I actually experienced was it was like past, present, and future all coexisted. It wasn't like they all coexisted, they did coexist. That in this state of consciousness, it they were all happening at the same time. And I can use an analogy to explain this, like from our current understanding. Say you go to one of those Cineplex movie theaters that has 20 different movie theaters, and say they're doing a special on one actor or actress. So they have 20 different movies with that same actress in it. In one movie, she's an old person. Another movie, she's a young person. Maybe in another movie, they're portraying a different sex. Another movie, they're portraying a different culture. Another movie, they're portraying that different time in history. And if you look at it from a linear perspective, you'd think, wow, how could this person be old, young, male, female, black, white, purple, at the same time? But because we know it's movie theaters, we realize, okay, in the movie theater, it looks like all of these are happening at the same time, but really they were experienced linearly. So that was a bit like how it was when I was experiencing timeless time. Like I absolutely got it that down here, we experience it linearly, but up there, we don't. And that it seemed that depending on where I put my focus of attention would be whether I was in theater A, theater B, theater C, or theater D, whether I was in the past or in the present or in the future. And I remained in this state of pure consciousness for a period of timeless time. It felt like I was up there for a really long time. And then suddenly, with a gasp of breath, I woke up again in my previously dead body that was lying on the ground outside. And it felt like waking up in an ice cube as the temperature of my body had gone down after I died. But coming back into that body, it felt like I was carrying a really heavy burden because the body I came back to was disabled with a serious traumatic brain injury. And I had huge worldly struggles. I had financial challenges, trying to get disability insurance, trying to pay all my bills, had to hire a lawyer, had to have a lawsuit, blah, 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 all at a time when I'm traumatized, I'm fragile, I have a traumatic brain injury, I'm vulnerable, I'm at my weakest. I was having tremendous cognitive challenges and impairments. Simple things like having a shower in the morning were challenging to me because I had so much difficulty with my short-term memory. I couldn't remember, have I soaped this part? Have I not soaped this part? Have I rinsed this part? Have I not rinsed my part? Washing my hair became difficult. I'd sometimes come out of the shower and I go, what's wrong with my hair? And I realized I never washed out the conditioner because I'd forgotten what stage I was at. So even simple tasks like that became challenging. And I was dealing with all sorts of physical challenges. I had severe headaches constantly. It was not a matter of did I have a headache? It was it an 8 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 today? I developed fibromyalgia. So I was constantly having pain in different parts of my body. I developed multiple sensitivities. I mean, I always was a sensitive person after all my Kundalini awakening and my multiple near-death experiences, but my sensitivities really got more pronounced. My sensitivity to sound, I had to be in silence all the time. My sensitivity to smells, I couldn't be around any scent. My sensitivity to chemicals, my sensitivity to any preservatives or chemicals in food, I had to go like all organic. I became just sensitive to everything. And I developed severe chronic fatigue syndrome. So here was me, this high energy person that used to have a very high energy life. It felt like bogged down with the worldly challenges the real worldly challenges I had to deal with. And what it felt like to me was it felt like I was in heaven and in hell at the same time. I would cling, like absolutely cling to the love and the light that I felt from spirit. And I really felt that it was my life ring. That is what kept me sane. That is what my anchor was I knew I was loved by God. I knew this was not any sort of punishment. I knew God's plan was perfect and loving for me and for everyone. But at the same time, I felt like I was in hell with all of the very real challenges I was having in the world. Sometimes I would wonder, why me? And this is actually a drawing I did. And I wish I tried to magnify it as much as I could. It's a much larger drawing. That this was a picture that I did as part of my healing journey. And the little figure in the middle is me. And I'm naked and I'm a child and I'm in the fetal position and I have my arms upstretched. I want mommy to pick me up. And I'm feeling that I'm protected with love. I'm feeling that I'm in a bubble of love. And I'm feeling if I don't know if you can see this, but what it is, it's a white light hand that's coming down from heaven, that I'm being held. I knew that I was being held in the hand of light. I didn't like it down here though. Look at all those swirls. In my real pictures, the swirls go out for another foot or two, right? That there's darkness, 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 darkness all around me. And what I titled this drawing was, Why Me? Like, why did I have to come back into this darkness? I'd much rather be up with mommy in the light. I also suffered from post-traumatic stress, and post-traumatic stress is the theme of what we're talking about today. And I would freeze if there was any ice on the ground. My whole body, it was like a reflex. It was like it was held on in my body. I would freeze rigid if there was ice ahead of me on the ground. I would do anything to avoid ice. I would avoid going outside in the winter. I would actually get an anxiety attack, a panic attack, if I went out and there was some ice in front of me on the sidewalk. I would have nightmares in my early month, and I would have flashbacks. I keep seeing myself falling and hitting my head and dying. And these are all classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So what happened? How did I move out of this? A very interesting shamanic experience that I want to share with you. Now, this is a folder from a Native Indian sacred site that's close to Toronto, the Peterborough Petroglyphs. Now, it is an active sacred site, so you can't take any photos. So the only thing I could take photos of was like flyers that they put out. So I apologize for that. But it's an eruption of crystalline granite. So it's like a huge crystal from the Canadian Shield that shamans have been coming to for thousands of years on vision quests. And they would carve these images into the rock. And the Indian name, the Aboriginal name for this site, translated to English, is the rocks that teach. And what I would experience, I was intuitively guided to this place. It's a whole other story many years earlier. And I would go there frequently, and I would have very powerful shamanic experiences there. And what would happen, both with me and also when I brought anybody else with me, is that when you go to the petroglyphs on any one particular day, a particular image would stand out for you. And you would think, oh, that's the image that stands out for everybody else. But it turns out the person beside you, no, it's another image that stands out for them. And when you go back repeatedly, it's a different image that stands out for you each time you go. And if you reflect inwardly, there's a strong message for you, the symbology of the image that you're looking at. Well, this particular day, which was maybe a year or so after my head injury, this was the image that stood out for me. Now, when I look at this today in my current state of consciousness, that looks to me as this is Nana Bush, which is the rabbit depiction of the shaman. And to me, this is the shaman with the long ears. So he's picking up vibrations from the other realms that is getting a download from spirit. So that's what I would call that today in my state of consciousness. But this day, a year or so after I'd had the head injury, when I saw this, it was, oh my goodness, it was a person having their head chopped open with an axe. Oh my God, I thought, oh, it looks like a person having their head chopped open with an axe. And every image that I looked at the petroglyphs, it was the same thing. Oh my goodness, that looks like a person having their head chopped open with an axe. Oh my goodness, that looks like a person having their head chopped open with an axe. And I was so in the experience, I wasn't reflecting on it. I was just almost traumatized that every image looked to me like somebody having their head chopped open with an axe. And then I saw this image. All of a sudden, this image spoke to me. And there was a sign, there's sort of a fence that keeps you off the petroglyphs. You have to walk around to look at them so you're not walking on the rock. And there was a sign right in front of this that was explaining what this means that day. And so it said the shaman's boat. And it explained that the shaman would go in this boat to travel into the ethers, into the other dimensions, to do soul retrieval, to recover soul fragments from their student, and to bring the soul fragments back so that they can be integrated and the student can heal. And I remember looking at this and reading that sign and wondering, gee, I wonder if I have any soul fragments that need to be healed. I need to tell you, I have been back to the petroglyphs many times since. That sign is not there. It has never been there. That day it was there. I touched it and I read that sign. I went home and then I started to meditate a little bit. And all of a sudden, what happened is I had a burst of near death experience memories come back to me. I suddenly remembered the pain of impact. I mean, you'll think I'm stupid, but what I said was, I wonder, do I know anybody who's been hit in the head with an axe? And then it went, oh, gee, maybe it's referring to me. And all of a sudden, I remembered, I got back the memory. I retrieved a piece of me. I remembered what it felt like when I hit the ground. And it felt like my head was hit with an axe. And I remembered it, and it was excruciating, but it felt good. It felt like I was more whole, that I felt this was a piece that had been missing from my story. And then immediately, as soon as I remembered the pain, feeling like being chopped in the head with the axe, it was like I traveled in time and I went back into my near death experience and I relived my entire near death experience, being whisked out of my body, being welcomed into the light, being explained that I died, the beings of light, timeless time, my past lives, all of that. But this time, I remembered another piece. I got another piece of my near death experience that I had not remembered before. I remembered the ending. I remembered that I had been given a choice. And what had happened was at the end of this timeless time, the beings of light reappeared to me. And I was given the choice. They telepathically communicated to me. You may now choose to reincarnate as a baby to further serve the Divine Mother. And or, interesting, the choice was and or to return to the maimed body. And I remember that in that state of expansion, of oneness, of communion, it was my heart. It literally felt like it was come out of my heart, the response. My intellect had gone to sleep somewhere on siesta, and my heart responded, oh, masters, please guide me. I want to do God's will. What is the higher choice? And so lovingly, telepathically, they communicated to me, it'll be more difficult, but to return. And faster than the speed of sound, I returned and I gasped a breath of life back into my body. But with this memory, I now knew that I had chosen to return. And, you know, some people say that we choose, and that's actually not the right word. The right word was I had accepted God's will for my life. I had trusted, I had surrendered, and I had accepted, yes, I accept God's path for my life. And with that, I was back in my body. And I felt more whole afterwards. So I really experienced soul retrieval, a spontaneous soul retrieval, where fragments of my soul came back to me. And it happened spontaneously, missing pieces of me, of my story, of my death and my near-death experience came back to me. And even though you might think it's horrible to be able to remember the pain, it didn't feel horrible. It felt right. It felt complete. It was like a missing part of me had been brought back. And my feeling of victimhood went away because I realized this is me. This is Yvonne. When they say, who wants to take on the difficult path for God? Yvonne's arm shoots up. So this was me. I got it. I accept. And so this whole feeling of victimhood dissolved. And also my post-traumatic stress dramatically improved. I understood it. It's a body reaction trying to protect me, which is okay. But emotionally, a huge shift happened. Now, I want to end today talking about how did I get from there to here? Because I was disabled for 12 years with this traumatic brain injury. How is it that I'm speaking to you today? And how is it that I'm president and co-founder of Spiritual Awakenings International? Well, more than 12 years later, I had another type of spiritually transformative experience on February 24th, 2016, when I was meditating at the Self-Realization Fellowship Retreat in Encinitas, California, on the holy ground where Paramahansa Yogananda used to go into samadhi. I'm very sensitive to holy vibrations. I love to meditate on holy places. So I was meditating there. And all of a sudden, when I was deep in meditation, I experienced like a fountain of light inwardly erupting in the center of my brain. And it was literally like the lights came on. I felt like a central part of my brain that had been asleep for 12 years suddenly woke up. And it was a miracle. My brain had been healed. And the inner message was very strong. Pass on what you have learned. And I'm striving to do that to this day. And at first, how I passed on what I have learned is then I wrote a book. I wrote Touched by the Light because my long-term memory circuits were never damaged by the traumatic brain injury. My rehab specialist, think of it as a computer. Your long-term memory drives are fine, but maybe it was the keyboard and the screen that were not working, right? And so now everything was plugged in and working again. So I was able to get out what had been stored in my hard drive. So I wrote this book and I thought, well, that's what I'm going to be doing, writing my books and doing talks. But guess what? The good Lord said, no, we've got something else for you to do. Because then I got very strong downloaded guidance in 2019. Actually, Robert Bear got the same downloaded guidance. We both got the download that we were to found a new organization. And that it was to deal with the whole spectrum of spiritually transformative experiences. And that the name was to be Spiritual Awakenings International. And so I'm going to leave you with this final slide, and then I will be happy to answer any of your questions. And what I just want to leave you with is with God, all things are possible. Healings and miracles do happen. According to medical science, 2 or 3 years after traumatic brain injury, that's it. You're not going to heal anymore. That is not what happened to me. Almost 12 and a half years later, I had the dramatic miracle healing. So there is hope for healing for everyone. Never give up hope. In God, all things are possible. So with that, I'd be really happy to answer any of your questions.
Wow. I am just in awe and gratitude that this is the third time since January that I've had the pleasure to do this with you. And I'm just blown away every time you speak. Like I just am in awe. So thank you so much for coming back and sharing all your wisdom with us. coming back several times. So I have some questions that have been coming to me private and in chat, but I want to about your traumatic brain injury, because that is so huge. So many NDEers, have come back with these problems. And one thing that you've shared maybe before with me, maybe it was privately, but if you could talk about what role did acceptance and surrendering to your situation play? Because remember, yeah, I mean, when you just surrendered completely to what is.
Mhm. Well, I think surrender played a huge part. Um, First off, I shared with you how when I remembered the ending to my near death experience, that a lot of people say, oh, you chose this, you chose that. That wasn't how I experienced it, although you might word it that way. How I actually experienced it was that it was surrender and it was trust. My soul trusted the divine and surrendered to the divine plan. I wasn't asking, what do you mean it'll be more difficult if I go back to the maimed body? I surrendered, I trusted, I accepted, and then boom, I'm back in the body. So similarly, when I was disabled for all those years, once I got past that sort of wounded inner child stage that I was showing you, I moved into a place where I could more fully um, feel that connection with spirit and my trust of spirit and my surrender to spirit and also my desire to surrender to spirit. And it was like I came back with a soul knowing that there must be some good, higher purpose in me being disabled. I mean, I didn't know I was going to have healing in 12 years. I mean, by the time you hit 6 years into your brain injury, everyone's like, okay, she's not going to heal. Um, I went to neuro rehab for 7 years. I started shifting from um, uh, I always hoped I would heal. I mean, I tried everything. I took out all my mercury fillings. I went on every type of cleanse you could imagine. And I detoxified my house and, had inspectors in to make sure there wasn't anything and organic diet. And I went to every traditional and alternative doctor you could imagine. But my anchor through all of that was my spirituality and my trust in the divine. And so, and lots of times when I had questions, I mean, I have this intuitive connection with spirit where I'll be guided to a particular book and I open it up, and there on the page right in front of me is the answer to the question that I have. And so I have many of these experiences along the way that would always be like confirmations for me that spirit is with me. And I just needed to trust. And that if I needed to know, there's this thing about being on a need to know basis, that I was on a need to know basis, right? And if I needed to know, the information would be brought to me, or it would appear in a book that I would be guided to and would open, or it would suddenly be on a TV show that may or may not have actually been airing that night, or it may or may not be on a sign that wasn't there the next day. That if I needed the information, it would be brought to me. So these were all sort of confirmations that I could trust. And I had already learned with my earlier near death experiences and my earlier spiritual practices how important it was to surrender to divine will, and that divine guidance is always for our higher good, whether we understand why or not, whether or not it makes sense to us now or not. If we need to know, later on we'll be shown why that was important. Otherwise, we just need to trust that that was important. Like that's happened to me a couple times when I called you, Sean. It's like after I called you, Sean said, "Oh, thank goodness you called right now. I really needed your call." And
Perfect timing,
I
yes.
know. So it was just a testimony of God at work. And so many of those things happened in my healing journey. And so they were affirmations for me to trust. And I'd reached a point where I thought that maybe it was the divine plan that I be a disabled person for whatever reason for the rest of my life. Remember Betty Eadie's story about the disabled drunk guy that, that was his role. It didn't mean his spirit was not a spiritual spirit. That was his role. And so I sort of came to terms and accepted for whatever reason. I didn't need to know why, that I was to be a disabled person for the rest of this incarnation. And I tried to make the best of it. I always tried to live the philosophy of look at the cup half full, try to look at the positive rather than, oh, I can't work. It was, well, I don't have to work. And fortunately, because I don't have to work and I had severe chronic fatigue, I was able to nap every morning, every afternoon, and sleep 12 hours at night, which I needed for many years. So it was a combination of surrender, trust, and personal effort to look at the positive that got me through that healing journey.
Beautiful. Now, a lot of people, and you understand karma, but a lot of people misunderstand karma and think that maybe you're burning off a lot of karma with all these NDEs, or that we have somehow maybe done something wrong to have these NDEs. What is your thoughts about that karma and all these experiences?
Well, I think it's partly true, but partly misunderstanding. My personal experience and how I've come to understand it is as follows, is that, in various yogic and Buddhist traditions, it is understood that yes, you can burn off your personal karma the real slow way, which is going through life experiences, making a better choice this time and learning your lesson. That's the slow route. Then there's self-reflection, which is another route to learn lessons that, okay, I'm not going to repeat this. Then there's more spiritual routes like meditation, prayer, various healing modalities, Kriya Yoga, for example, where you're running energy up and down your spine to burn off your karmic residues. But it's also understood that you can burn off karma metaphysically through your physical body. So that by having physical diseases that you are speeding up, burning up your karma. So I thought, okay, if I'm speeding up, burning up my karma, that's good because my objective is God consciousness at some point. So if I'm speeding up, burning up my karma, I accept. But then, I told you about my opening up the book phenomenon and finding something there. I also was guided to the fact that we not only burn up our own karma metaphysically through our bodies, but actually for 7 generations around us, for our families, our friends, the people that we pray for, that we metaphysically can also burn off their karma through our physical bodies. And so I remember when I read that, I thought, okay, I accept that too. If I'm burning off my karma, I accept. If I'm burning off karma for people that I love and pray for, or for the planet, I also accept. So it was a win-win situation.
Okay, so, and you've already answered this, but a little bit. But so after the one NDE, when you were seeing ghosts and everything for a while, a lot of times we experience this great light, people that have had these experiences, and then they hit the wall, or sometimes the light leaves, darkness comes. Adyashanti calls it, I got it, I lost it. What would be your piece of advice for people that have had these amazing experiences and then all of a sudden start experiencing maybe a dark night of the soul or something afterwards?
Well, if you think of me as that little child, naked in the fetal position with her arms upstretched to Divine Mother going, why me? With all this darkness around me, that was not a positive emotion, but it was a part of me. And because I'm a trained psychotherapist and worked as a psychotherapist, I knew it was really important to honor every part of me and to give it voice so that it could heal. And this was a wounded part of me, wounded child part of me. And So other people will experience that too, that maybe they go into some personal darkness, maybe they express it in a somewhat different way from I did. I found the art really helpful. Through the grace of God, someone gave me that suggestion. Why don't you draw how you feel? I thought, what a great idea. And that allowed my inner child to express, because drawing, it's very primal. It's like the inner child comes out. And so yes, it can happen. Yes, it's normal. Yes, it's all part of our spiritual journey. And I love what Judith Miller spoke about in her previous presentation, that we really need to honor and embrace that all of us have to go through this. We might have different kinds of woundedness around different sorts of issues, but we all have to go through some healing. And if we actively embrace it, and accept it. So the word accept is coming up a lot. Accept it. And also accept help and support. And maybe that help and support will come through friends or therapists, or maybe it'll come directly through God, like you open up a book, or you go to the petroglyphs on your summer holidays and have a spontaneous shamanic soul retrieval. That healing comes in all sorts of shapes and forms, but we have to be open to receive it too.
And that acceptance that you're talking about, literally accepting what is, whatever state we're in, not judging ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's really beautiful. So you were greeted by your gurus. So is it true for people that haven't had these experiences, and this would be based on all your research and what you know, is it true that we don't die alone, that we're always greeted, no matter how alone somebody might think they are, that they're greeted on the other side by somebody?
Well, I've heard many, 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 many people's near-death experiences and mystical experiences over the years. And everybody's experience is unique. And you don't always get an experience that is from your spiritual tradition. So that's something I wanted to throw in here. My 1995 near-death experience, I cut it short because I wanted to have time to talk about the 2003 experience. But the being of light that I saw when I was going up towards the light, it was like, I didn't recognize it. I didn't know what it was. It was a being of light that had the form that was half male and half female. It seemed to be female on the left and male on the right. And it seemed to have 4 arms, and they were all held in sort of unusual postures. And one of the legs was upraised as if it was dancing. And the closest I've seen to a figure that looks like this, but I've seen it afterwards, is the dancing Shiva in Hinduism. And somebody once wrote me when they heard one of my talks that there is some deity, I suppose, in Hinduism that does the half male, half female. And they said they thought that was what I saw. And I'm not a Hindu. I was raised as a Christian, and yes, I've studied yoga a little bit, but I don't know ancient Hindu mythology or some of these archetypes. So it wasn't something my conscious mind was expecting. Similarly, like Judith Miller said that she's Jewish, and then she started having mystical experiences with Jesus. Right. And I've had other people tell me, one woman who is a very, very devout Catholic told me that she had this profound mystical experience, actually it's in my book, of Kuan Yin, which is from the Buddhist tradition. So you don't necessarily get things that are from your tradition. That's point 1. And then point 2 was, somebody always greet us when we die? I'm going to answer that question with yes, because the divine always greets us. And in yoga, there is an understanding that the divine that loves everyone and that we're all infinitely connected to will appear in whatever way the person is receptive to. So interesting near-death experiences in children, because this morning someone asked Dr. Peter Fennick, were there ever animals that appeared in these end-of-life experiences? Well, certainly in near-death experiences of children, frequently they're met by pets. And so maybe that was what, for that little child's soul, would be the way that the divine could welcome them. So the divine, either the divine manifesting as the pet or the divine bringing the pet there to welcome the person. Other people, maybe what was right for their soul would be just to go into that state of love and bliss and communion without seeing any personages. And I just, all five of my near death experiences were different, but none of them contradicted the other. I think, if anything, they added to the other. And I look at it like, I love this picture of the mountains behind me. I have it there on purpose because I look at it as like we're all climbing up to the mountain peaks. We're on different paths, different angles. We might have different views. We might have different perspectives. But the closer and closer we get to the top, we go, oh, we're still all climbing to try to get to the same place, which is up there to touch the sky. And the differences that seem so big when we're at the beginning of our journey, once we get closer to the top, they seem to dissolve.
Yeah. And some of the pieces start to come together finally, which
Mhm.
is nice. Okay, though, one final question. Several people wanted to know about your Kundalini Awakening, which we talked about a few months ago at Toronto Awakenings International. So where's that video? It's on Toronto Awakenings
Toronto
International.
Awakening Sharing Group. Yep.
Yep.
And I plan on next year talking about Kundalini at the conference. I wasn't going to be talking about it this year, but I do have some videos that are on our SAI YouTube channel. So subscribe to our SAI YouTube channel where I do talk about Kundalini Awakening. But just very briefly here, I'll tell you because somebody asked the question. I did not have post-traumatic stress after my Kundalini Awakening, but I did have post-traumatic stress after dying with my 2003 head injury. But my Kundalini Awakening, I was meditating. I had learned a meditation technique that where you were visualizing the energy going up your spine to the crown, and I was visualizing a lotus on the top of my head. I'd been taught this technique. And all of a sudden, when I was sitting in my meditation, this happened in 1976. So I was 23 at the time. And I started hearing this large, loud roaring sound like the roar of a waterfalls. And I started feeling this really powerful energy rise up my body. And it went up through my body, and then it seemed to burst out through the top of my head. And then I went up and out of body, and my consciousness expanded. And it seemed like I filled a vast expanse of space. And it was like my consciousness also transformed into this feeling of love. I now know it was a mystical experience with my Kundalini Awakening. Back then, I didn't even have words to describe it.
That's
And,
beautiful.
and,
Thank
and
you.
I remember, oh, we're not finished yet. And I remember thinking, wow, no wonder people love to meditate, because I thought this was what all the experienced meditators were having every time they meditated. And I guess in my innocence, just stayed in that expansive state until my meditation ended, and then it contracted back. And then I was very disappointed when this was not happening every time I meditated afterwards. But I had a lot of after effects that I described in my video on Kundalini, rushes of energy up my spine, chakra sensations, chakra sounds. But the most important thing was it started a long-term process of spiritual transformation of consciousness in me, which did involve doing a lot of inner work, clearing the issues that were held in my lower chakras until the energy could start stabilizing in some of my higher chakras. And so please watch my video on Kundalini or read my book, Touched by the Light,
Yes.
because I talk in great detail about Kundalini in my book, Touched by the Light.
And one quick takeaway for everybody here, a lot of people watching here, and they're going to watch it later, their family members have had these experiences. They themselves haven't. So what advice could you give to family members or friends of somebody who has had a near-death experience or other spiritually transformative experience that is in trauma? Like what are things that family members and people can do to support people that have had these experiences?
Love them. Love them. That would be my bottom line. Love them, support them, um, give the person the space to go through their healing journey, and and try to avoid labeling it as wrong or bad, and label it as it's their journey, it's their healing journey. And I think if families are and loved ones are coming to events like this and striving to learn, I think that's very good so that they can be supportive. And they might discover they have their own wounds and trauma that they need to heal too. So maybe they're not so different from the traumatized person after all.
Wow. Thank you. Absolutely amazing.